So in the last few months, I've done a few tag videos. A couple of those were vinyl tag videos, and in one of those videos, one of the questions was show a record that you bought while in high school. Um, and I was thinking about that question, and as I'm in and out of my collection, which is pretty regularly, almost daily. I started coming across certain records that I indeed bought while in high school. And so I set 10 of them aside and I decided, let me do a video and just show you guys some of the vinyl that I was buying while in high school. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at some records that basically I purchased back in the 80s. And I went to high school during the mid to late 80s. And so a lot of the vinyl, actually, I believe all of the vinyl I'm going to show you is going to be from that time frame. So let's just get started. Now, the first record I want to show you guys, I've talked about this record often. I've shown it on different videos. This is the very first record I ever bought with my own money. This is the first album, self-titled, from UTFO, a rap group out of Brooklyn, New York. And this is indeed a classic. It really needs no introduction. If you know about it, you know. They went on to have a long, successful career. I think they put out five albums total, either 5 or 6, something like that. Unfortunately, 2 of them are no longer with us. Kango Kid and the Educated Rapper are no longer with us. But many years ago, I got a chance to actually speak with Kango Kid on the phone. And I also got to meet DJ Mixmaster Ice, who's down here dressed like a ninja on the turntable. So this record is very special to me. And one interesting part of this record is, in a lot of albums they have their thank yous and shout outs and all that stuff on the back. And that's what this big huge section is right here, where they would just put all these people on there, just a thank you or whatever, some acknowledgement. And I remember as a high school kid just constantly looking on here and reading different names. Most I didn't recognize and some I did. People in the industry, other rappers, radio stations, DJs, those kind of people. And as the years went by, I would periodically pull this out, flip it over, and then try to find out names of people that I didn't know the last time I looked at it, but that I had, found out about later on. And to this day, I look on here and I try to see who's on here that I know I didn't know the last time. So that's a pretty little activity that I do from time to time, even to this very day. So yeah, that's the first one I want to show you. I pulled out 10 records too. I figured 10 would be a good number. Next up is the first self-titled, once again, album. This is everybody's favorite Kool Moe Dee. Yes, the famous Go See the Doctor MC from the Treacherous 3. Now, there's many records. I bought a pretty decent amount of records, my 4 years in high school. And so I could have pulled out a lot of them. But I pulled out records that, had some type of significant story behind it, or something that kind of went along with the purchase. And when I came across this Kool Moe Dee record, whenever I see this record, it reminds me of the record store that I bought it from. We had 3 stores in Milwaukee that were all called Audis. One was called Audi's. One was called Audio Vibe, and one was called Audi's One Stop. And they were all like basically the same owners. All of them ran kind of different. They were all in different parts of town. This particular store, which was the Audio Vibe, no, this was Audi's One Stop. They were down, no, that wasn't Audi's One Stop. This was just Audi's. This was just Audi's. They were on Fond du Lac and North. I hope I'm saying that right. Fond du Lac and North. Like, yeah, no, that was the other one. I'm mixing all these stores up. I used to frequent all of them regularly. This was on 24th Street in Wells, going towards downtown. Crazy fact, this was like a block away from where Jeffrey Dahmer lived, his apartment building that he lived in. And my very first apartment was basically kitty quarter to where Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment building was. That was 1989, if I'm not mistaken. 1989. I'm not sure if he actually lived there while I lived, basically across the street. That I'm not sure about. But the year, the time frame kind of lines up. But yeah, that's crazy, right? Anyway, so whenever I come across this record, I always think of that particular artist that I bought it from. There was a guy in there. His name was Keith Terry. Keith Terry was a DJ on the college station WMSC. WMSC was like the best station, in the city because it was a college station. And as some of you might know, college radio, you could pretty much play anything you wanted. There was no playlists. They had different genres, different shows, but those DJs, didn't have to stick to any type of, any rules. You just couldn't, obviously you couldn't play any music with profanity, but you would just play, basically, the DJs would play what they wanted to play. So even to this day, most college stations, you're going to hear music that you really don't hear on commercial radio. So most college stations have very, very cool radio stations because they're not really following a whole lot of rules. But Keith Terry was cool, man, and he was working in there the day that I bought this record. And we're going to bring Keith Terry up again later in the show. Next up, one of the greatest MCs of all time, T La Rock. This is T La Rock's first album, Lyrical King. I remember buying this. I'm not exactly sure. I don't recall if I heard any songs off of here before I bought it or not. I'm not really sure, but it might have been just how cool the cover looks that kind of attracted me to this particular album. But this album is solid front to back. T La Rock is the brother, I want to say the younger brother of Special K from the Treacherous 3. I hope I'm saying that right. I think he's the younger brother. He might be the older brother. I don't remember. But you're talking about hip-hop royalty between him and his brother. This is as good as it gets when it comes to rap music. These are the guys that started back in the late 70s, early 80s. Just classic material. And what's cool about this record is he had two guys on here with him that were featured on this album a lot. And this guy right here, does that look familiar to anybody? Well, I can tell you that that young guy was a young Greg Nice from Nice and Smooth. So that was him in the late 80s right there. Late 80s, early 90s. So he was just a beatboxer on this album. You want to hear some really incredible beatboxing? Check out this album. There's a song on here called 7 Minutes of Beatboxing. If you've never heard of it, you'll be impressed if you're into beatboxing and stuff. But yeah, that was a young Greg Nice where he got his start. Now the next record I want to show you goes right along with the Tila Rock album, and this is Yo Bum Rush the Show by Public Enemy. I remember having kind of mixed feelings about this record. There were some songs that I really, really loved, and then some songs was just, they were all right. I can tell you right now, my favorite song on here was Terminator X Speaks With His Hands, the turntable song on here. Very incredible. And then, of course, I love My Uzi Weighs a Ton, Sophisticated. This was crazy, man. Everything about this record was just so different. I mean, Def Jam had, none of their artists were the same. All of their artists were like just from all different sides of the spectrum. And this was like a really dark, weird album cover. It's kind of not really explainable, but these guys are like in some kind of dark garage, and Flavor Flav reaching over, everybody's looking like, I don't know what's going on here, but this was crazy. And then, as crazy as this looks, the first time I saw them in concert, I think they were on tour with LL Cool J and a number of other acts. And to see Griff and the S1Ws with that whole militant, they were marching around the stage, and Griff was yelling out orders, and they had like Uzis in their hands. It was crazy, man. But the way this lines up with the Tila Rock album is both of these were at a different Audis. This was Audio Vibe on, what was that, 26 in Capitol? Something like that. Am I saying that 27? No, this was like 23rd, 24th in Capitol, actually. And I bought both of these records, the Public Enemy and the Tila Rock, at the same time. And where I lived at the time was probably about 25 blocks away from the record store. And I remember walking all the way up there to that record store, and I picked up Public Enemy and Tila Rock. So whenever I see this album, it reminds me of this album, because they kind of go hand in hand, because I bought them at the same time. Next up we have Luther Vandross, The Night I Fell in Love. Yes, Daryl D is a lover of rap music as well as R&B and soul music. And so Luther, everybody knows Luther was the king back in those days. Period. End of story. And this was a really, really big album. This was the album that had Till My Baby Comes Home, The Night I Fell in Love, If Only for One Night, Creepin'. Those were like the singles off of there. And there's only 8 songs on this entire album. And out of those 8 songs, 4 of them were like hit songs. So this was a pretty popular album. Now this album, I was like assistant editor on my high school newspaper, and then I went on to become editor. And I just remember there was some kind of contest that the newspaper was having. It was open up to the whole school. I don't remember what the contest was. Oh no, I remember. You could pay to have any kind of comment appear in the newspaper. And then people got to vote. The students of the school got to vote on whose comment they liked the most. And then I got the most votes, so I ended up winning like a gift certificate to a record store that was inside the mall. When I got to the record store, I bought this album. I bought the Smoke Some Kill album by Schoolie D. And, man, what was that other album? I bought 3 albums. And I'm not sure what that third album was. But this was one of them. Now, the Schoolie D album, I had listened to that, and I was so offended by all of the profanity on there that I just took it off of the turntable and I snapped it in half and threw it in the garbage because I didn't want to hear all that. Meanwhile, DJ Cold Money, Schoolie D's DJ, was incredible. His scratches were great, but it was just too much vulgarity on that album for me to keep. I wasn't trying to hear all that nonsense. But this one made it. And all these are the original pressings of what I bought, I think. Yeah, these are all the same ones I bought back in the 80s. So yeah, Luther. Luther was a man. I miss Luther too. Brings us to Heavy D. Heavy D was huge. He had an incredible intro into the music industry. The album that he came out on was an album called Uptown that was produced by Marley Marl and executive produced by Andre Harrell from the Jekyll and Hyde crew. And then we all know Andre Harrell went on to work for Uptown Records. He worked at Motown for a little while. He just recently passed away, unfortunately. But at the same time that the single for the Uptown album, which was Uptown is Kicking It, which was a posse cut that had like five or six different acts from the Uptown album all appear on that song. But at the same time that that single dropped, Mr. Big Stuff from this album dropped. So Heavy D's introduction to the whole world was appearing on the Uptown is Kicking It song, as well as Mr. Big Stuff right here. And people loved him. It was a smash. This record reminds me of when I was in high school. A lot of the students, including myself, when you got certain new albums, you would take them to school. Not that you could play them in school, you couldn't, but you just wanted people to know that you had this album. So people would actually walk around. I would walk around with this record under my arm, you know, from class to class, and people would see, oh, what you got there? Oh, okay, blah, 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 blah. It was like a conversation piece. Sounds silly. It was, but hey, we were high school kids. What do you want? But yeah, this is a great album. If you haven't heard this, you might want to check this out. His Big Time album, which was the second album, is actually my favorite album. But this album is solid front to back. I never got to see Heavy D live. He was supposed to appear in Milwaukee at the time. He was on tour with MC Hammer, Jodeci, and there was a few more acts I can't remember. Oaktown 357, and I think it was like Michelle or so. There was a whole tour, and they didn't make it to Milwaukee. They actually dropped out of the tour because that's when Trouble T. Roy had his accident and passed away. So, and this happened right before they were supposed to do the Milwaukee tour. So they started off on the tour, but it was that tour where Trouble T. Roy lost his life. So, you know, that didn't happen. And now Heavy's gone. So we lost 2 guys out of this group. But yeah, the memories. This was a great album. A lot of these records I'm showing you came out in 1988. Now, 1988 was super significant when it came to rap music. If you Google all of the rap albums that came out in 1998, you got a star-studded lineup of legendary albums. This was one of those albums, EPMD, Strictly Business. What can I say? This record was huge. EPMD was huge. You heard this album, the singles being pumped out of every ride that was rolling through the streets. They were on tour. Their first tour, as a matter of fact, it was the LL Cool J Nitro tour that also featured Big Daddy Kane, Slick Rick, De La Soul, and then EPMD. And EPMD and De La were actually the opening acts. But when I tell you this was huge, man, this album was huge. Erick Sermon's production, you know, what can I say? You already know. He's a legend in the game. I just remember, man, people would even have sound system installed on their mopeds. I remember being at the parks and outside concerts and just always hearing your customer being just blasted, you know, out of every ride, man. They was killing it on the radio. You got Chill and Strictly Business. Man, this was crazy. Take a little time and look up rap albums that were released in 1988 and tell me if that wasn't a great time in history for rap music. One of my favorite MCs, one of my favorite albums from that era is Steady B. What's My Name album. This album was solid. The first album was solid, but this album, I think, really solidified him as a superstar in the rap game. The title track, What's My Name, was my favorite song off of here, and Use Me was a big song. This whole album was great. Tap Money was like incredible on the turntables. Serious was a big hit. I think the remix was produced by KRS-One. That was the one that they chose for the video. This was crazy, man. We all know the terrible situation Steady B got himself into. So we won't get into that, but that's a shame. Anyway, you know what's crazy about this record is look at this Fila suit that Steady B's wearing. Now let me tell you something. I specifically remember when Fila first popped up in Milwaukee in 1986, 87. The sneakers at the time, they only had that one style. They were white and it had the stripe that was blue and red. That was the only style they had. Those sneakers were $80 in 1986. And I remember the Foot Locker in my local mall had gotten 2 Fila suits in there. And they were hung up over the cash register way in the air so that nobody could even touch them. You could see them, but you couldn't touch them. They wanted to make sure nobody touched them. One of those suits was, I should say, $300, and the other one was $350. Who in the world can afford that in 1986, 87, 88, you know? Well, 86 is when, 87 is when, you know, I first saw them there. Well, fast forward a few years, a year or so, and this suit wasn't one of the ones that was hanging up. Those were 2 completely different suits. But fast forward a couple of years later, and I'm in, what was the name of that store? I think it was Ross. I was in Ross. And guess what I found in Ross? This Fila suit. That very Fila suit. And I think it was man, I think it was 30 bucks, 25, 30 bucks. So I bought it. The pants were way too big for me. I remember sewing the pants together so that it would fit me correctly. And at the time, I was living with my older sister and her husband, and she saw that I had did all this sewing and did all this altering of this suit just to make it fit me, and then she wasn't having that. So she made me take it back to the store and return it and get my money back. I was really, really pissed off about that. And she didn't have any idea of the significance of this, of this album or of this suit. Had no idea how much, Fila was being sold for back in those days. And yeah, I had to take it back. Yeah. That still bothers me when I think about it to this day. But I owned it for a little while, a few days or whatever. But yeah. Big ups to Steady B and Tab Money. Next up, man, oh man, oh man. I cannot tell you how incredible this album is. Stetsasonic, when they showed up on the scene, when this album came out, it was bananas. On Fire is the name of this album, and it's also the name of the first single that came out on this album. And you know what as great as this album was, I remember their second album, which was called In Full Gear, had that single called Sally on it. That came out this was 1986 that this came out. In 1988 is when In Full Gear came out. 1988 also was the year that NWA first came out. So I specifically remember that they were bumping this even more than they were bumping NWA. Because a lot of people think that NWA, they just came out and they were just on top. No, they were just another group back then. It was a lot of groups putting in work, and they were one of them. But I just remember hearing Stetsasonic just a little bit more than I was hearing NWA. And they were both being played a lot. The heavy, heavy rotation on the radio, and definitely, the videos and stuff like that, and in the skating rinks and the little nightclubs and stuff we used to go to, house parties and all of that stuff. So to this day, I was actually listening to this earlier. I still got the record on the turntable right now. Classic album, man. Definitely one of my favorites of all time. Now, number 10, and let me say this. You might have seen these little labels on some of these. They've been starting to fall off. I used to put these labels on my records, and then I would put like the titles of some of my favorite songs on there, so that, when I was digging through my crates, it would tell me, okay, this song, that song was on here, songs that I liked. But that's something I used to do in high school, coming out of high school. Number 10, let me show you my last one. Who can forget the 2 Live Crew? Where do I start with this record? Coming out of Miami, they were super, super huge. This was a great album. 2 Live Crew and like Shy D, MC Shy D. Man, we was killing those records, in Milwaukee back in the day. They were burning these records on the radio. It was great. It was incredible. Great songs. This is one of the coolest album covers, I should say, that I've ever seen before. I'm not going to get into why, because that's another video that's coming up soon. I'm going to do a video about my favorite album covers and why. But remember, I was just talking about Schoolie D and how I had to break that record in half because it was so vulgar. Well, this record has a similar story. My favorite song on here was Two Live Is What We Are. But anybody who knows the Two Live Crew knows that they were very vulgar themselves. I didn't care for their songs that had a lot of dirty lyrics and all that kind of stuff. But because I like Two Live Is What We Are, what I did with this record was I took a nail and all of the songs with dirty lyrics and cursing, I took a nail and I permanently scratched them. You can see them. See this right around? See this and this right here? I just took a nail and around the whole record so that those songs could never be played ever. So there was 2 songs on that side, and there was one song on this side. I won't get into those song titles. But yeah, this very, very record is the same record that I had since high school. All of these records I bought somewhere within my 4 years of high school. That's crazy, right? It's been a little while actually since I listened to this record. I later on got to see Luke perform at the Jam for Peace concert in Milwaukee. That's a whole nother story. Big, huge, all-day concert, basically. Brother Marquise has passed away, unfortunately, but the rest of the guys, are still around and still get busy from here and there. So there you have it. Those are... Oh, wait a minute. You know what I want to show you? These records are from my high school years, right? But I came across another record that I just had to share. It's not from my high school years, and I didn't actually pay for it with my own money. We're going to go back even earlier. We're going to go back to 1975 maybe. And this was an album that my parents bought me when I was just a young little tyke running around with comic books and Steve Austin action figures and all of that kind of stuff. This is a show and tell Disney record. Now, if you're wondering what show and tell is, there was this device that looked like a TV. It looks something like this. Now, this one has a turntable on top. Ours didn't... the turntable on ours was slightly different than that, but it was basically the same setup. And what you did was you could play the record, and it came with this little doohickey right here. So what you did was, while you're listening to the record, you would stick this down in this TV, or I should say it was basically just a monitor. And the monitor would project the different pictures, because this is just like an old school negative with a whole bunch of different pictures of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So you could stick it all the way in there and just pull it up one at a time. But every time you would pull it up to the next picture, the picture would project what was on the monitor, but the actual record was telling a story. So it would tell a story to each picture, and then it would basically tell you when to go to the next picture. So you pull it up a little bit more, the next picture was show on the monitor, and then it would tell a story that picture basically would explain visually. So you just keep going like this until you went through the whole entire story. And we had a lot of these. In fact, on the back here it's showing Mickey Mouse, Dumbo, Donald Duck, 101 Dalmatians. And in addition to all of these Disney stories, they just had a lot of stories in general. Stories about nature, about animals, about different children's programs and whatnot. But we had a number of these. My parents were wonderful, especially when it came to making sure that we were entertained with lots of toys. We had, me and my sister, we had a lot of toys, a lot of toys. And this was just one of the many toys, if you could call it that, that we had back in those days. My parents always made sure we had plenty of reading material. We had the entire encyclopedia set up in our house, all of the highlights magazines. We had the Childcraft for kids books. We had plenty of reading material and plenty of visuals and things to keep us occupied in terms of toys and pop culture and all of that cool stuff. So this is like a little extra that I wanted to throw in because I came across it. I thought it was really cool, and it just kind of reminds me of the wonderful childhood that I had. So now we'll stop it right there. Thank you guys for joining me. We'll see you next time, and you guys stay safe.